Number 5.
Rising a notch is the Fray, a band whose lead singer, Isaac Slade, learned to play piano because he couldn't sing. At age 11, Isaac, a would-be singer, had such a bad case of laryngitis, he lost his voice. But he wanted to make music, so he took piano lessons every day. Here's Isaac Slade and his band The Fray with Over My Head.
I never knew that everything was falling through.
Number 3.
Standing Pat is The Fray, a band whose leader, Isaac Slade, says, quote, "We're pretty boring. After a show, we usually go back to our hotel to call our wives, and we go to sleep early." Here's The Fray with Over My Head.
American Top 20.
You're hearing them, the biggest hits of the week. And we're up to a band now that refuses to fix it in the mix. Isaac Slade of The Fray says, quote, "We want our music to sound as live as possible. So what we play in the studio is what you get. Post-production might make us sound better, but it wouldn't be real." Now, here's Isaac and his band The Fray at number 11 for a second week with Over My Head.
Everyone knows I'm in over my head, over my head.
American Top 20.
And that means we're up to the number 1 song in the USA this week. It's by a band whose guitar player is also a critic. Not a music critic, but a culinary critic. Isaac Slade, lead singer of The Fray, says of all the members of the band, it's guitar player Dave Welsh who has the most to fall back on. Quote, "Dave is an amazing chef. He keeps us very well fed. If we fell apart tomorrow, he could open a string of successful restaurants. He even writes the restaurant reviews on our website. And so, if you go to thefray.net, you discover how good the donuts called beignets are at the Café du Monde in New Orleans, and how excited Dave was to tour the South. Quote, "The land of grits and sweet potato fries." He writes that New York has the best Italian food in America, and that in Omaha there's a cafe called Delice where they serve, quote, "a mountainous savory pie thing with a whole stick of butter in it." Wow. That's Dave Welsh of The Fray on food. Now, here's Dave Welsh of The Fray on guitar. And he's playing guitar on the tasty song at the top of the chart. The number 1 song in the USA on American Top 20 for a 5th week in a row is How to Save a Life by The Fray.
Casey counts them down.
Well, now we're up to this week's only debut. It's by a band with a short name. A name inspired by a lot of conflict. Lead singer Isaac Slade says they became The Fray because there always seemed to be a fray going on. Quote, "Our biggest arguments happen when we're writing songs. We spend a lot of time writing, and we argue over every note and every chord. Everyone has an opinion and lets it be known. But their arguments don't end there. Quote, "We spent many a night arguing about a name. The Fray seemed like a natural. And this week, that ongoing fray was all worthwhile because it's given them their first top 10 hit. Debuting at number 8 on American Top 10, here's The Fray with How to Save a Life.
Step 1, you say we need to talk. He walks, you say sit down, it's just a talk.
American Top 20. Top 20.
And up a notch to number 19 is The Fray, a band whose leader, Isaac Slade, says song lyrics often come to him in the dreams he has. Quote, "I wake up and try to write down everything I can. In the morning, I can't remember writing the words at all. Words like these, The Fray with Look After You."
Casey counts them down.
These are today's biggest hits by today's biggest stars. Well, now we're up to the song Look After You, a song written as a proposal of marriage. It's a song Isaac Slade of The Fray wrote to his girlfriend at the time, Anne. Anne was living in Australia, far from Denver, where The Fray is based. Isaac was able to see her only a few times a year, and he wanted Anne to move to Denver and live with him. But she liked Australia, and she wasn't sure she was ready to get married. Isaac says, quote, "So I wrote a song to convince Anne that I was serious." The song includes lines like, "What's mine is yours to leave or take. What's mine is yours to make your own." And it did the trick, because Isaac and Anne are now man and wife. Now, here is that love song by the Fray, up 3 notches to number 15.
Casey's Coast to Coast.
These are the songs that lit up the chart during 2007. The hit at number 4 is by the Fray. Lead singer Isaac Slade says the song was inspired by a teenage suicide that happened while he was working as a camp counselor. It's about how he wishes he could write a manual on how to save a life.
Where did I go wrong? I lost a friend somewhere along in the bitterness, and I would have stayed up with you all night had I known how to save a life.
Counting them down with Casey Kasem.
Well, now we're up to an extra by the Fray, a band whose guitar player didn't know much about music when he joined the band, just do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Joe King says, quote, I didn't pick up the guitar until I was 15 or 16. I taught myself to play. Since I felt more comfortable picking notes than playing chords, that's what I stuck with. After graduating high school, Joe got married, became an insurance adjuster, and the guitar took a back seat to his life. And then he ran into a friend from school named Isaac Slade. Isaac was starting a band and wanted Joe to join, which is how Joe King became a founding member of the Fray. And he found you can play a lot of songs with just 8 notes. Though it probably doesn't hurt that the band has a second guitarist who takes care of the chords.
Casey's Coast to Coast.
And that means we're up to the new number 1 song in the USA. It's by a band that traveled light until their leader decided to bring along his mom's piano. Isaac Slade says, when the Fray formed in 2002, I carried an electric keyboard with me, but I was never happy with the sound. And so one day, Isaac decided to do a show using a real piano. Quote, my mother had an upright in the living room. It was her pride and joy. She was very nervous about me borrowing it. Isaac says all the band members helped him lug the heavy piano out of his house and push it into the van. Quote, there wasn't room for anything else. The rest of the instruments were hanging out the windows. And at the hall where we were playing, we had to remove a door to get it in. But it was worth it. It sounded great. I've played a real piano ever since. In fact, he's playing a real piano on the band's latest hit, the song that this week takes over the top of the chart. The new number 1 song in the USA on American Top 20 is You Found Me by the Fray.
Counting them down with Casey Kasem.
And that means we're up to this week's number 1 song in the USA. It's by a band whose leader got some bad advice when he was getting started, advice he was smart enough to ignore. Isaac Slade of the Fray says when he was going to high school, he became friends with a local musician. Quote, he was kind of a mentor. He gave me lots of advice, but especially, he said, not to write songs about my own life. It was strange advice. Isaac says, I couldn't figure that one out. My own life was the only thing I could write about. And so, Isaac ignored his mentor's advice. Quote, I love working out my emotions on paper. It helps me make sense of life. I think writing about my feelings is the reason people listen to our music. And it's his feelings that Isaac is dealing with in the song at the top of the chart. The number 1 song in the USA for a 3rd week is You Found Me by the Fray.
American Top 20.
And that means we're up to the number 1 song in the USA. It's by a band whose leader stays grounded by saying his prayers and paying his bills. Isaac Slade of the Fray says success can be very unsettling. Quote, we try to be ourselves. We work really hard to remind ourselves that we're just doing a job, which is making music. To keep his feet on the ground, there are certain things that Isaac holds on to. 1, his religion. He says, there's a strength that I find in faith. You have to follow your beliefs, and those beliefs can keep your life in line. The other thing is, I pay the phone bill every month. I make sure it's me writing the check. I pump the gas in my car. I go shopping for groceries. I try to keep as much of my life normal as I can. unquote. Which isn't easy when week in and week out, you've got the song at the top of the chart. The number one song in the USA for a fifth week is You Found Me by the Fray.
Casey's Coast to Coast.
And that means we're up to the number one song in the USA. It's by a band that witnessed a crime and made sure the criminals were caught. The Fray had just put on a show in Tempe, Arizona. They were in their touring bus, heading back to their hotel at 12:30 in the morning. The band members were exhausted. They just wanted to get a good night's sleep. But when they looked out the window of the bus, they woke up fast. Guitar player David Welsh says, "It was like something out of a crime show. There were these two guys trying to pull a big screen TV through some bushes behind a house. We couldn't just watch, so we turned into Crime Stoppers. While the driver called 911, everyone on the bus piled off. Dave says, we sort of surrounded the guys, which was probably stupid, but we couldn't let them get away. The police got there fast and made an arrest. Little did they know they had been busted by the Fray, unquote. Or, to put it another way, busted by the band at the top of the chart." The number one song in the USA for a sixth week is You Found Me by the Fray.
American Top 20.
Hi, this is Kasem. For Isaac Slade of the Fray, You Found Me isn't just a song. It's his way of dealing with the meaning of good and evil in the world, and how God deals with good and evil. We'll have details this weekend on American Top 20 from the premier radio networks.
Casey counts them down.
And that means we're up to the number one song in the USA. It's a hit that deals with the eternal question, why do bad things happen to good people? Isaac Slade is deeply religious, and he's trying to work out his beliefs in the song You Found Me. On one level, he says, it's about the disappointment that comes with life. But it's more complex than that. You see, for Isaac, the song deals with the problem of evil and why bad things happen to good people. Isaac says, I encounter tragedy after tragedy. I wonder if there is some kind of person in charge of this planet. Where are they? Well, those thoughts have touched a lot of people, fans who have kept it at the top of the chart for 9 weeks. The number one song on American Top 20, brought to you by the acclaimed Bose Music Wave System, is You Found Me by the Fray.
I found God on the corner of First and Amistad, where the West was all but one.
American Top 20. Top 20.
And that means we're up to the number one song in the USA. It's by a band whose leader says, if he could be any superhero, it would be Lord of the Dance. During a recent interview, Isaac Slade of the Fray mentioned that he was a fan of the TV series Heroes, which led the reporter to ask, if you could be any superhero, who would it be? Isaac said, well, I guess most people would want to be Superman, but I'm afraid of flying, so being Superman wouldn't work for me. Instead, Isaac chose a real person. He says, I want to be Michael Flatley, the dancer. He calls himself Lord of the Dance. I've seen him perform. He's a superhero on stage. I'd like to make a fraction of his moves. It would put our shows over the top. And it's the top where Isaac and his band have been dancing for the past 10 weeks. The number one song on American Top 20, brought to you by the acclaimed Bose Wave Music System, is You Found Me by the Fray.
Lost and insecure, you found me, you found me.